Alright. Good evening, everyone. We'll get started now, and we'll start off with the educational activities budget. Just as a reminder, budgets must be presented by a student, and it's advisable to have faculty, staff, other students, whoever else present to help answer any questions the committee might have. You have 30 minutes for the presentation. We can ask questions during, but we'll try to save most of our questions for after. After 30 minutes is up, or if it's shorter, we'll move into our discussion, which will take about 45 minutes. And then after that deliberation, we'll make a tentative decision on your budget. And the result of that will be brought up at the open hearing, which is tomorrow at 5 p.m. In the MU Ballroom, and that's where we will set the final fee level. If you could also send me your presentation after, that'd be great.
Sweet, so like the Prezi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever works.
Right on. I'm just gonna read line by line.
Sounds good.
All right, feel free to interrupt at any point, but my name is Drew Hatlin. I'm the chairman of the Educational Activities Committee that's been around for decades now, serving the students of Oregon State University, mainly the student-sponsored student organizations, voluntary student organizations, and currently a few departmental student coordinated programs. I'll start off by introducing you to the committee itself. There's myself, Brendan Southward, who is the vice chair, Tiffany Lee, Crystal Boyd, Mohammed El Garguri, Saul Bollinger, who's the representative from the House of Reps, and then Rihanna Taniguchi from the Senate. Currently, we serve several student organizations, like we just mentioned earlier, some departmental programs, and some departmental student-coordinated programs as well. As you can see, we serve a diverse range of student organizations as well as departments here at Oregon State University. And Educational Activities, as a funding board, is here to support the education of students here on campus outside of the classroom. So really anything that has to do with something that will enrich their experience while here at the university and enrich that of their student organizations. To give you a quick budget summary, we have a net total budget of $692,582. And that coupled with a fund balance appropriation of $100,650 leaves us with a total amount of a request from SIFC of $592,032. Yes.
Is this your zero increase budget?
So we'll be moving forward with EdAct as one budget because we were able to have decreases across the board within all of our minor budgeting boards. So we felt it wasn't necessary to bring an A budget and a B budget because it was a decrease across.
Okay.
Most of our budgets were able to really absorb the mandatory increases, which, as you'll see in your budget packet, were few and far in between.
Which is fine, because that's what SSI did. They didn't have to hit budget B because they reduced their allocation originally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was just wondering because it didn't say.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, like I said, feel free to interrupt the questions whenever you feel clarification is necessary. And as you can see, we have a decrease in our ask of the per student per term down to $9.58, $8.50 in the summer. And if you account for that fund balance appropriation, which we are moving forward, that leaves us at a fee of $8.08 during fall, winter, and spring, and a summer fee of $8.50 because that was set the previous fiscal year. That's an 8.27 decrease to the total budget from last year, and a 21.6 decrease, 21.6% decrease to the requested amount with the fund balance appropriation. EdAct contains 13 student organizations for a total of 24 total EdAct funded units. We're just going to move through the budget packet itself, and we'll come back to the PowerPoint when we come to the questions that you had of EdAct and the general questions themselves. You'll see on the second page of your packet are our mandatory increases and decision packet summary. We didn't have any decision packages. As I said before, we have a decrease almost all the way across the board. We have only a few mandatory increases, that of the educational activities administration when it comes in the form of assessments and interest income. We had an increase. But for those mandatory increases, were contained within the daily barometer, the KBVR, FM, and TV shared position that they use for production, and then technology support, Mark Williams, who is our IT person for educational activities, student media, and also used by ASOSU. Moving on to the summer fee for 2015. We decided as a committee to reevaluate this fee and really see what the impact on students were going to be. So the largest components of our expenses come in the form of traveling, either group travel to conferences, staffing over the summer, and also theatrical performances presented by University Theater. We started off by looking at what our summer term expenses were in actual terms during the summer for expenses and income, and we saw that was a net expense of $88,220.69. If you brought that down to actually what the per student per term would be, it was much higher than the $850 that we had originally. So rather than increasing it, we decided to decrease that summer fee in coordination with the reduction of the student fee for fall, winter, and spring that we're proposing for this year, which is a reduction of 16%. So what we're asking from fees for the proposed 2015 summer fee level is $47,143, total of $7.17 per student. Like I said, that's a difference of 15.7% per student. Moving on, we've got our summary of our fund balance and working capital. Educational activities is unique in that we have a very large fund balance. Well, I'm sure it's actually pretty common across the board from what you all have seen from presentations. But we're unique in the way that we make use of the fund balance dollars. As you can see, our assessment shows that we are significantly over what our working capital needs to be at per the recommended OUS level, as a total of $505,000.39 over. We realize that this is a large number, and we're putting forth a plan to start spending down that large working capital. Now, keep in mind that there's been talk of, and it's actually in progress, of student media moving out of EdAct. And we haven't talked about yet, this conversation will continue in the winter and also into the spring, as to whether or not student media will bring some of that working capital with them in that move into their transition as their own budgeting board. Again, this is a conversation for future, but we want to keep it in mind as a frame for this conversation. We've also got a couple other ways that we plan to draw down the working capital. Each year, the working capital, a dollar amount of that working capital is set by the committee for how much they want to fund recognized student organizations outside of our budgeted organizations. This is in the chance that an organization that is not currently funded wants to host an event, activity, or travel to a conference, and their funding resources are very slim, and perhaps they only have the OSU Foundation to look to. We provide an alternative funding source for them in order to send them to a conference or, like I said earlier, provide an activity or event on campus. We've also found ways to reduce our itemized budgets, particularly in the additional computer expenses that are incurred for KBVR TV and FM, as well as technology support. Each year, there's been $10,000 set aside for our organizations to make technology requests in the event that they need a new computer or other technology needs. And we found that our large equipment reserve allowed for some additional spending to cover some of those minor equipment costs. You've got an additional page that was given at the beginning of the meeting. Bless you. The Educational Activities Equipment Reserve. If you all could look at that reference. So our estimates right now are that our projected ending balance of our equipment reserve is going to be around $486,000, $32.34. That's an overfund of $149,370.81. That overage allows us to spend money not on just major equipment purchases, but also on minor equipment purchases or anything that's under $5,000. Which is where those line items come into play, those computers, because rarely do you see a computer that costs over $5,000. So we've been able to make use of either using our equipment reserve fund or spending down of our contingency, our working capital. Also, the committee was dedicated to reducing the student fee across the board. We did find redundancies in our budgets, but we also had a commitment to reducing the fee itself. And the committee settled on a dollar amount of $1.50 per student per term. We thought that this impact would spend down our working capital, but at the same time reduce the impact of student fees on the students of OSU. We've also got another supplementary sheet there talking to the fund balance and working capital plan. Again, that total was $505,039. We've got a few examples of what we're trying to put forward as a plan. If you look at FY 2013, that's our current fiscal year, we have already dedicated $50,000 of our working capital to fund these requests from organizations. If that trend continues, you can see that at least $50,000 will come out of our working capital up until FY 2018, which is as far as we projected. The $1,650 is also what we accounted for that $1.50 decrease in the student fee for next year. Again, next year's committee will reevaluate and see whether or not that $1.50 is sustainable or if there's a different impact on the student fee that we would like to pursue. A couple other options down there, if you see use it 20% a year and use it 10% a year, those are other options in which we can start to spend down our working capital. A note that 2015 is the estimated year for student media to move out. And if that is so, our recommended OUS levels will actually drop down to be $45,000 rather than the recommended $348,237. So with student media out of our budget, it will drastically decrease what our needed working capital will be. Yes.
Media moves out of your budget, would they take some of that working capital with them as well?
That's a conversation that we're looking to have in coordination with student media as well as the committee itself. We've looked at where that money has been put into, whether or not it's the underspending of student organizations, to see whether or not student media has paid into that or if they've been doing more drawing out of it. Again, this is a conversation that we're hoping to have in later winter or spring term and then moving into the transition itself. So that's still an undetermined amount, and if any. Okay. So yeah, back to the 20% and 10% a year. If you can see, if we do 20% a year, it'll be drawn out by 2017. And if we use 10%, it'll be significantly reduced by 2018. And again, these are just projections. It's for the committee to evaluate moving forward. Fantastic. Next up, we've got our paid positions. We have it in probably a different format than what you've seen from other budgeting boards, but we did our best to kind of take the diverse range of the units that we fund and fit them into the example, Exhibit D, that you provided us. And if you can see for each position, specifically in the barometer, there are multiple listings And those are to reflect whether they're in full service, the summer and spring break, and then also the reduced winter break. Yeah, you can see out we've got the barometer, Prism, educational activities, collegiate 4-H, who houses 1 intern, and then 11 academic coaches, and then student staff for university theater. Barometer has an editor, a Beaver yearbook has an editor, business manager, as well as photo editors. Any questions?
Do you have any mandatory increases, and if so, did you mark them anywhere in here?
Not on the student positions. There were no mandatory increases because they were all set at a level that was either above minimum wage or their stipends were not directly based on minimum wage. The only mandatory increases that we saw were with professional staff.
Okay. And are those reflected in here?
They are reflected, and again,
Is that on
the
this
summary
page?
the summary is on the perchance. Yes, those are on the additional page as well.
Okay.
Okay. On to the queries of SIFC. So question number 1 was, how many students do you serve through your programs and events? And this was a difficult question to answer for EdAct. Like I said, because of the breadth of students and activities that we serve through our programs, it's more easy to measure the amount of students that are involved, specifically in the student organizations. But for hard and fast numbers, we can see that the barometer has 7,000 copies being read by approximately 1.8 readers a day, and an average of 3,500 web hits on a daily basis. As well as KBVR FM has a 24-hour broadcast, and KBVR TV is reaching 25,000 households on channel 26 just in Corvallis alone. But if we look at the students involved in the student organizations, we can see that just involved intricately within the organizations themselves, it's about 234 students each term. And then if we look at the students involved in student media, it's about 219 to 312 students each term, depending on the interns and the practicum that we have going on and the hiring levels. In the Academic Success Center, we can get a little more tangible information about how many students are being served. In just fall 2012 alone, there's 366 coaching appointments and 12 success presentations that reached over 450 students. So they're very far-reaching as well. And then University Theater is another one that reaches quite a wide audience, with 100 to 200 students involved in the productions a year, and then 201 students participating in the audience in the fall production of last year. Yes?
I have a question about academic coaching.
Yeah,
so I'm
absolutely.
curious how we fund academic coaching through student fees, because it was my understanding that a position like that an academic coach had to be funded through general fund dollars. If you can just kind of clarify that, for maybe someone else can clarify it for me, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, the Academic Success Center is one of those areas in EdAct that we're looking at maybe transitioning out because there's no direct line of payroll and authority in there. It's hard for Kurt to make sure that all of the academic coaches are doing their hours. So it's one of those areas that looking at transitioning out, but all of those dollars go straight to student worker pay. And I don't know whether or not university regulations allows for that, but it's something that has been a trend and been existing within educational activities for close to, since at least 2008.
And I know that, I mean, like you said, they do reach a lot of students. I'm just kind of curious how we kind of justify that, if it is, because that could just be my understanding and it may be a misunderstanding on my part, but that's...
Yeah, it's a very interesting program in that they it's not just like individualized tutoring for particular areas, but it's really talking about what those study tips are that make you a more effective student.
I'm familiar with what they do. I was just kind of curious how how we fund it through student fees.
Where do they work in the Academic Success Center,
Academic Success Center, yeah.
which is the one they built? No,
No, that's the Student Success Center.
Yeah. They're
Where's
housed
it?
in Waldo.
Down.
On the first floor
Yep.
or the basement, depending on where you enter the building.
Yeah,
Right.
next to the Ryan Center, huh?
Exactly.
Do you know how they got originally put in the budget back in '08?
I don't know if '08 was the first year
Or
that they
just-
started, but I would defer to Kurt if you have more information on
Yeah,
them
it's been a
prior to
question
that.
Since it came up, for that very reason, because guidelines say that they don't fund academic endeavors, if you will, and it was justified that it was employing students to benefit students, but it's been a question that comes up every year. Should this entity really be here? And there's a commission that got together a couple of years ago, which we're gonna start up again, to look at those, does this make sense, who's funded and why? But yeah, it's a question that's come up every year. And, yeah.
Okay. And I'm guessing, the same thing about, I'll just wait till you're
Okay.
done, sorry.
No, no worries. And then lastly, technology support, which is Mark Williams, serves as the IT consultant, like I said before, that services student-funded programs and departments, including student media, EdAct, and ASOSU. Your second question was, how many students do you employ, and what percentage do they make up of the total staff and total wages? If you look, there's a breakdown in your budget packet. The majority of our areas are 100% student staff, and only a couple, as in like the technology support, where it would be 0% of that total wages. Moving on to question 3. What did you try last year, or new last year, and how effective was it? Will these programs continue? Please provide us statistics and detail on this. As a committee, we didn't really go outside of our box to try anything new. However, this year we are looking to fund student organizations in a new and innovative way, which I'll address a little bit further in the next couple questions. Question 4, how effectively did your organization, your staff, and your budget respond to last year's increased enrollment? Last year's increase allowed us to provide more funding to our groups while also reducing the cost per student. And that increased enrollment did not adversely affect our groups because of the fluctuation in student participation. That kind of freedom and increase in enrollment allowed us to reach more students without costing more. Question 5, have you planned on or already put into new programs or events for this academic year? How do you plan to evaluate them and their effectiveness? This is the really exciting part that we've taken on with educational activities. We're going about a new way of funding student organizations, and it's really an ideological shift. Whereas most areas within student fees are very individualized, this is my budget, this is my direct line item, I own this money. When really it's from a collective pot. All students pay into this large dollar amount, which then fees committee then allocates out. And that's something that we really want to reflect as a committee and get in the mindset of the student organizations in which we fund. So we're looking at making more of a collective budget, a joint fund, if you will, that addresses the students' needs on a per-term basis. So rather than this year's leadership within a student organization having to project out a year and a half in advance, which might be slightly unrealistic and definitely not very accurate, especially because some of our student organizations host events in the springtime, and they haven't been able to yet evaluate their success and their needs for that event. Basically projecting out, like I said, a year and a half in advance. So this way, we have a dedicated dollar amount for the student organizations that we have previously had a dedicated budget. And within this dollar amount, it's much like our fund balance request. Those organizations can come and draw out of that dollar amount throughout the year to more directly address their needs on a per-term, per-event basis. So you're an organization and you want to spend money, you want to ask for money to put on an event, you just come up to student fees. We haven't ironed out the process exactly, but they come to educational activity and basically say, we want to have this committee, this is what our ideal budget looks like. And then we'll review it as a committee and then work with them as building that relationship to make sure that their needs are addressed and that they have the dollars that they need to put on a successful event.
So is that way?
Yeah.
When we look through, so I noticed when you did your rationale sheet, somewhere back here, no, that's the 5-year allocation rationale. You talk about the percent of each budget that was actually used and the amount allocated, and then show a few reductions, and then just, an overall reduction. I'm wondering, so that's basically the plan, is that you're gonna create that kind of pot
That
of
collective
money,
pot of
and then
money, yeah.
as they actually need it, they'll be able to use it.
Right.
But they're still gonna be operating under the general, guidelines that this is how much money they've been allocated.
Well, in a way that it'll be earmarked, but not necessarily a dedicated budget, so that those funds won't be all spent fall term, and folks won't be just adjusting for position
Yeah.
to spend that money, which is why it'll still come back to the committee to make sure that it's being allocated fairly and equitably across the board, and making sure that it's really those as needed for that event itself.
So, okay, so, and then if there were, so let's say that something happens during winter term, right, and there's a big surge that, these organizations spend a lot of their money or this money, and you come back and let's say an organization has a large spring term event and they're planning on having, $10,000 in their budget, they only use $2,000, but in spring term they're planning on using $8,000 for that event. Would that then would that be like a contingency, come out of contingency fund money? Or
Right.
how would you?
Right, since this is the first year of us trying out the system, we don't know whether or not all those dollars are gonna be maximized, which is why we reduced it 20%.
Yeah.
And if it is fully used and capitalized on, there's definitely that, like I said, that large fund balance working capital that we have to draw from. And then we'll readdress the needs going into next year, whether or not we need to increase that dollar amount or whether or not that's an appropriate amount.
So is that also why then if you look through the student organizations, there's,
Many of them are not requesting.
yeah, unless they have student pay, they
Correct.
don't have a budget, but then there's a total expense budget, is that there, or, no?
The collective.
Oh, collective activity budget, okay. And so that's basically taking the approved numbers with the reduction from the last fiscal year into the next year to make that collective number, right?
Correct,
That's how you-
yeah.
Okay,
And I'll explain it when I blow this little
Oh,
guy up in a
cool.
few questions.
sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I will definitely come back to that. Moving on to question 6. Have you done any assessments on your current organization's programming? If so, how, please provide us information. What we do for assessments is at the end of the budgeting budgeting process, we ask folks what their experience was like, whether or not they were heard, whether or not they find their feed allocation enough. And then we also, for each fund balance request, we require an after-action report so that folks that are using the money actually report back and let us know how the process was, and we get an accurate reflection of their experience. On top of disseminating their information that they gather, say a group goes to a conference and three folks from their organization go, they come back, disseminate that information to their organization itself and then to the student body at large. So we really try to make the most bang for the buck and see how far we can make our dollars go. Question 7, what ways are you looking at cutting or reducing student fee per term? Does it involve increased efficiency, cutting, reducing the line items, or a combination of the two? I talked about earlier the several ways that we're looking to reduce the fee. We've found the redundancies in those computer allocation requests, which accounted for thousands of dollars that were being budgeted for that were an unidentifiable need. There's no real way to project out what that was. So those dollars were just getting built and built and built, and eventually, if they weren't being fully used, they were going back into our contingency fund. So that on top of the reduction that we've asked for, putting forward to use out of our fund balance to reduce the $1.50, as well as the reduction of the 20% of that collective number to more accurately reflect the amount of dollars that are being used. Question 8, we think that the student fee is an appropriate level. We found a way to reduce the fee and the request of EdAct. And while there was a little bit of pushback, a little bit of grouchiness about having a 0% increase in allotment, we really found ways to maximize those student fee dollars and find ways to reduce it as much as possible. The collaboration that we take part in question 9 is really with the Student Events and Activities Center, where we provide the funding for a lot of these organizations. They provide the advising and support role as far as risk assessment and event planning. That's really their area of expertise. So we defer to that group as well as the advisors of some of those organizations itself have their own advisors. So we have collaboration across that plane, and we really encourage as much collaboration between the student organizations as far as putting on events as possible. We don't really have any outside funding sources as a committee, although we do encourage our organizations to find other funding sources on their own. Student media, for example, through advertising and sales, they have a way to offset some of their expenses. And then there's several grants that our organizations get to help put on their events. Like Forensics has a grant just for their traveling and competition costs. And Rainbow Continuum has a grant to continue their programming on campus. And then if we look at the joint fund allocation rationale, I'm just going to be real brief on this. If we took the organizations that we serve that have turned in a budget, basically asking them, is your current funding level appropriate? Do you need additional resources? Do you have any additional funding sources? And whether or not they need a presentation time. And across the board, we got, yes, our allocation amount is adequate. So we took those organizations, looked at their 2011, 2012 approved dollar amount, and then also their actual dollar amount, and then saw what the dollar amount difference and then the percentage used. And then we took their current funding level and then saw that the percent used was only 69.27%, which is pretty far under what the allocated dollar amount was. And rather than just dropping it down to 70% of that total dollar amount, we wanted to allow for a little bit of wiggle room. So we settled at 80% of that total cost, and that was still able to reduce us about $26,000 off of our overall budget. Any questions on that before I move on to the EdAct specific questions? Yes.
Where are the, on this, where are the not direct, like, the student groups that aren't directly named up there, are they included in that fund allocation? You were talking about earlier how you fund more than just these groups listed.
Right. So these are the historical, we'll get into the 5-year trend of organizations that have been a part of educational activities, but these are the ones that have that, had that previous dedicated budget. Organizations that come in and ask for additional funds outside of this group take place in that contingency request, so they're not reflected on this. We just wanted to include folks that previously had a dedicated budget to ensure that their funding was still being taken care of.
For the specific questions, do you have something you really want to cover? Because you're close to, 30 minutes.
I mean, I was going to let Julia talk about the external review for student media. I figured you all would be pretty interested in that. And Carly's here to speak on the yearbook. I'll just defer to them if that suits your needs.
Yeah.
And then I'll be happy to clarify on any other questions that I provided for you.
Yeah, we'll do that during the discussion. Yeah, you can
Okay. Student media review. Do you all want to come up and
make it kind of quick.
chitty
though.
chat about that?
In the budget report, we did, that Carmen submitted
Do you-
on behalf of student.
Do you want Julia to come up here? Sorry.
Yeah, if we're gonna talk, let's come up here.
Damn.
I'll share the podiums.
They had $8,000. We spent $175.
My name is Julia Sandage. I'm the director for student media. In 2011, student media underwent an external review that was conducted by members of the College Media Association, specifically from, well, I'm not going to get specific because I'll forget, but Vanderbilt University was the head of it. In that review, it was about a 4 or 5 page review, but the 3 key points that they wanted improvement was that The professional skill set representing all of student media was either inadequate, incomplete, or underdeveloped. We have gone through several changes in professional staff in the last year. We've added an editorial content coordinator. We've added Bill Gross, who's in the back of the room, as the broadcast coordinator. We've also added a new assistant to the FM and TV station. That person had left to go off to a master's degree. And then we've just recently hired for the barometer's assistant or student media assistant who had retired. We also are putting all of the professional staff who remain on a development plan, and they will, that's part of their personnel record. They will be reporting back to me on what they're doing to develop their skill sets. And then we are also, we have one more professional staff who is retiring at the end of the academic year, and that position will be replaced by a coordinator who will work to, rather than just creating the advertisements for the barometer, will also help train students in how to do that work themselves. So more of an advisor role rather than a doer role. The other part of the report was looking at the practical experience courses that we teach in student media through new media and communications, saying that those classes were overburdening students. The students were being held responsible for accounting for those that coursework. So what we've done is cut that load of students back to a maximum of 30 students per advisor or professional. Before this year, there was at least one professional staff member who had up to 100 students per term that she was responsible for, and therefore the students were being held responsible for accounting for them. Now we have 4 staff members, and we are spreading those 100. Right now it's 90 students, so it will be 120 students. Also, we are starting in the fall implementing a lab fee that NMC will be required to pay per student that will help offset some of the costs of the professional staff members. We are also requiring that all the students submit work in multimedia. So rather than just working for one of the mediums, we are asking that they try to do some of their hours in at least 2 medias now so that they can start to have a professional skill set that will take them outside when they graduate. Yep.
Has there been any effect of the new major splitting new media communications on the practicum and all those students?
Not, you know, that the digital media communications is really just the major, where before it was a liberal arts you were majoring in with an emphasis in new media communications, and so it's really more an academic title that your degree would have on it. It's still the same organization, still the same people.
Still the
We
same.
still would be teaching, so they will be coming to us from digital media communications next year rather than new media.
I just wondered if it changed the requirements or anything.
No.
Okay.
No. And this is really a practical experience class, so we're hoping that the students will come and get hands-on training and start to make media themselves. You know, it's not a lecture course. The students aren't getting graded for sitting and listening to lectures and so forth. We do require that all of the students in new media communications attend a midterm where they hear a speaker who speaks about what it's like and the responsibilities of being a member of the media in a community, that talks a lot about diversity and how the students need to be responsible to the people that they actually serve. And then the last part was the policies and procedures of student media were outdated, and at least in terms of their handbooks, were quite cumbersome. There was a great deal of information that made it very hard for the students to get through and find out what it was they were able to do and not do. We have just recently adopted new policies and procedures for the Student Media Committee, and we are still incomplete in updating those policies and procedure handbooks. But with this new assistant coming on, she will be working with the student leaders to update those policy books, and then getting those also digitized so that they're available online and searchable by keyword. So really, of those 3 major areas, we've made a great deal of progress in all of the areas, with the one exception of that we need to get those handbooks digitized and put online now.
Thank you. Did you want to address the yearbook in questioning, or do you want Carly to come up?
Really one thing. So for the bylaws or policy procedures for the student media, I kind of aware that once student media becomes its own budgeting board, you have to revise them again.
I think that's all still in the works. We have a committee we're organizing right now that will be co-chaired by Don Eiler and Kurt Black to look at what those bylaws need to include, whether it needs to be a separate budgeting board. One way or another, it would be the majority student vote, though, and that will
Yeah,
be.
I mean, it's not even majority student vote, but it's an only
Okay.
student vote, but yeah. that is-
Yeah, and we're just looking right now at, we're forming the committee to evaluate what it
Okay.
is exactly. Been searching student fees to see if there were any really guideposts, but Kurt Black has agreed to work with
Okay,
Don.
cool.
And that committee will be seated by primarily students, with
Yeah.
Kurt being our
No,
advisor.
that's good.
I have a few questions, like a few line item. Oh, sorry, my bad. Good.
No,
Sorry.
it's yearbook,
Yeah,
make it quick.
I think brevity is the key here. Thank you.
So who said they had a question about it?
No, you go ahead.
Update on BB yearbook.
Oh, recently I'm Carly Chandler. I'm the business manager for the Beaver Yearbook. And recently my editor and I have been starting different advertising campaigns targeting Greek life and campus organizations. We're working out a deal where for a certain percentage of an organization buys a book, then we will give them a page in the yearbook for free. And that has been working quite well. We're actually, last year we sold 168 yearbooks total, and this year we have already sold 168 yearbooks. So, and we haven't even really started the campaign. It's just starting to get rolling. So we're pretty hopeful that we're going to reach our goal.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the multiple options? that we have?
Yeah, we looked into going into a digital yearbook. We decided against it, but we did meet with the library archives, and they are interested in creating a digital archive of the yearbook and making it available online. And that will just cost, it's a $500 startup fee just so they can get like the technology and everything to convert it to PDF, and that'll be posted online and available to students through the library.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
With that, please approve our budget.
Thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure. Love to entertain
So about the
questions.
university theaters, student pay, what exactly is that? I guess, what does that mean?
So Kurt might be able to speak a little bit more on the historical of this, but what it is it's it helps to offset some of those costs for students. So by offsetting the student pay of the theater and the students it takes to run like the ticketing booth, to run the costume shop, it makes it so that the cost to students is far cheaper to go see a production.
So basically, it's kind of like EdAct subsidizing theater, but specifically in student pays to just bring costs down for students that choose to.
Right, exactly. It makes it so it's an affordable rate to actually go see the performance, but also those funds all go directly back to students in the form of student pay.
Because otherwise, they'd have to charge like higher ticket prices or whatever to run the show and to pay their students, the amount of students they have.
Right, well, yeah, in
Oh,
order to
right.
pay their students, they'd have to charge.
Well, have to,
Higher.
they could get more money from the university perhaps, and not have to charge students as much.
Potentially. I think it would reflect in higher, what we heard in the presentations, and Kurt might be able to speak to the history of this, but it's really been there to make it more affordable for students to watch these performances.
Okay, I have a few line item questions. I'm just curious how we're planning on making up these costs.
Okay.
So,
Where are we looking?
okay, the first one is within the barometer, so Institute Media. So, well, no, not your questions. Different barometer question. Yours is about. So you reduced from $4,000 down to $2,600 for telecom recurring charges, even though they spent like 37 last year, and that's the same thing for I think the Beaver Yearbook, even though theirs is much smaller, reducing those recurrent telecom recurring charges. So are those just going down in general for within student media? Is that why you're seeing those decreases? Because it's a pretty large amount of money.
Yeah, so those decreases are coming in cutting actual lines, actual phone lines within those areas.
Okay.
Where they found that they don't need maybe 16 phone lines, they only need 5.
Got it.
So The actual amount shows that they were being used last year, but they found that they were able to reduce those costs, and that accounted for a significant decrease in those
Got it.
budgets.
Oh, cool. So then the next one that's like that is broadcast program services. How are they planning on reducing their, I mean, they're cutting it in half, really. Was there something identified that said that it was necessary to cut that, or is that gonna be like harmful to?
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to Don.
I'm editor-in-chief of the Barometer, and it's Don Rather. We decided to get rid of that. That was our charge we were paying for CNN, so sort of our wire service for the newspaper, which is also being used by KBVR TV and radio, but they're not using that this year. And the Barometer, we were looking for things to cut and get rid of to sort of kind of meet the zero budget line that you all requested. So we decided that was one thing we could cut, and it's probably going to make it more difficult, but hopefully the result is that we're going to have all student content in the newspaper next year. It's going to be very hard for the next editor,
Yeah.
but hopefully.
So the reason I was asking, because I was like, they seem like it would make it difficult, and I'm wondering why you would have an increase of almost $4,300 in travel when you're cutting these things that are really helpful to the Barometer.
Yeah, so we decided to increase the travel budget because it hadn't been accounted for in years past, and there's been times when we wanted to go to conferences or on trips or to send like staff members to go cover something. Like we wanted to send them to cover the Alamo Bowl in December, but we had to put in a special funds request, so we decided to account for it in our budget this year, so we didn't have to go back and just request especially next year. So we're anticipating travel in the future.
And also professional development.
Professional development, so to send the feature editor-in-chief to a conference somewhere to get them trained up and to network and to learn great new things about media.
There is also an
That's what- yeah,
$18,000
okay.
decrease in the printing and publishing.
Yeah, so we're gonna decrease the amount of newspapers we print every day. About 1,000 newspapers aren't getting picked up every day, so that's pretty much wasted. So we decided to cut the amount of the number we printed every day to save money and not cut down as many trees. But we have it planned out so we can still continue to print 5 days a week next year if we wanted to, but we'll only be printing 7,000 copies instead of 8,000 copies.
For the wire, does it cost anything to use like other college?
That's something we're looking at. We're also looking at getting an
So
agreement
those-
with OPB to use some of their content, so to get more state news in the newspaper, because it's one thing the CNN Wire we kind of lack is like regional news. So it'd be nice to get some of that in there. So we're definitely anticipating that it would be great to. We're looking to negotiate something with OPB so we can use their content and then also use content from other college newspapers around the country. So to hopefully make up for it in case there is a day where we do need to cover something else, fill it in.
And then the remaining budget that you see in there for those line, for the CNN is part of that agreement?
Mhm. Yeah, we had to, the contract is, continues until September 1st, so we have to, that's why there's still an amount in there, is because we have to pay for it until the end of the contract. But we tried to cut as many things as we can to make it a very austere and clean budget.
You also cut $3,000 from unclassified staff salaries and $9,000 from classified salaries.
Yeah, so one of our professional staff members is retiring, and his replacement is he's been here for 32 years, and his replacement is obviously going to be paid considerably less than he was, as he's pretty much maxed out because he's been here for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way we were able to help. And also another professional staff person went from a 12-month contract to a 9-month contract, so she won't be working over the summer.
Oh, okay.
So that was two other ways we found to save money, which was very helpful for us.
For KBVR, there is, so last fiscal year you used $248.80, yet your request for this year is $5,000, which is an increase from the previously approved budget of $3,175. How was the need identified for an increase that large when you use less than $300?
So which line item are you looking at?
201.15.
201.15.
201.15.
Audio and video supplies?
Yeah.
What was that for? Julie, do you remember this? Yeah, it's for TV.
Yeah, it was just, there had been an accumulation of funds for minor equipment, I think for $5,000, and it hadn't been fully spent. We decided to reduce that budget, and then if there are specific needs that we could come to EdAct for fund balance reductions or spend down, rather than maintaining that line item.
Okay, well, the line item actually increases. The line item was only at 3,175. It increases.
I'm gonna catch up with you.
Okay.
So,
So maybe while we go, there's another one too that maybe I can ask them, maybe you or
Okay.
someone else can. So the next one is right below that, minor equipment, which is 20200. It was budgeted for $8,304. They only spent $175.83. So there's a significant reduction into the next ask there, and that may just be,
Yeah,
There-
I can address that.
yeah.
So that is, again, with that, being able to spend down some of that, either the equipment fund or from our contingency request. And those are things that you really can't plan on whether or not a camera's gonna break and they're gonna need to buy another one. So we wanted there to
Like
still,
a camera break would be included in minor equipment though?
minor equipment and also, yeah, minor equipment.
Okay.
under 5,000.
Right. But we also wanted to allow for a little bit of flexibility there in case there was a sensitive timeline that they needed to get something very quickly, that they would still have something in their line item.
So that's why
to
you
be
went
able
with
to
the
purchase.
3,400 rather than cutting lower, even though they.
Right, exactly. And that's why
That's fine.
that's why we cut the near $5,000 of the computer non-capitalized right below it.
Got it. Where's this?
I have a
Which one?
question
This one?
about the Beaver yearbook. Are they still?
Yeah, 1 second. Did
Okay.
you have a response for the? Okay, yeah. Give me your book. Shoot.
For the the printing and publishing for 2011, 2012, there isn't a number for that. Oh, just kidding, there is. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one.
No worries.
For the printing and publishing, right, for MPCV, there
Right.
isn't a number for the actual, but then it's approved for this year for about the same amount, and for next year, I'm wondering, did that amount go down if there were so few yearbooks printed, or do you know what is up with that?
I'm gonna defer to Carly, if you can.
What line item?
Oh, sorry.
24606.
Okay.
Oh, I see, the number just didn't go down.
Just adjusted over.
Right, how did you find the 23,200?
We signed a contract, with the publishing company, that we are required to print 400 yearbooks every year, and that's just what the cost of it comes out to be,
19,000? Or no, 23.
23,000.
Okay. But it was less in 2011, 2012?
Beaver Yearbook 24606.
Oh, no, sorry, that line item, the reason it's less is for, 1 second. Every, book that we sell, our income isn't reflected in the top, it's deducted from the cost there.
Mm-hmm.
So like the more books we sell, it's deducted from that line item.
So there's a base of 400 books, and if they sell more, it drops down their overhead cost. Kind of like with printing and mailing. If you ask for 50 of something, it's going to be an exorbitant amount. But if you ask for like 75, it goes down a little bit for the price per item, right?
That covers anyone who orders the book online.
Mm-hmm.
So if you order online, that income actually shows up in that line item rather than the income up on the top.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have another question, not about student media, but, sorry. Okay.
So you're saying that income generated from selling those yearbooks is shown in the expense line item?
They net it out on the invoice when they bill for it.
Oh, is there a way that, because I mean, then you don't really know what money you're making.
And the net do.
Right, so there's a series, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's income that comes in prior to actually the printing of the book, and then right before the book is printed and we get an invoice for it, they net out some of that, so there's a net amount of the invoice. It's a credit back of a small, a portion of some sales right before then.
To a book that you sell a book to like a student.
They can talk about this better than I can.
Okay,
other than
so
I
you
know that
sell a
it
book
appears
to
on
a
the invoice
student?
Online.
And then when you request the 400 books from the publishing company, they net out the sale?
It's depending on how it's ordered, so if I enter it online through my account, that income will show up, in the top half of the budget. But if they order the book online by going to the Jocelyn's website, we get, a credit back, and that shows up
Okay.
in the lower, in the publishing.
Is there, I mean, I'm guessing you know the cost of these books, so you can easily like back out the revenue from the books. So that's what would be beneficial to see the actual revenue. So you back it out and then you put the revenue on the top, and then you actually have, because we don't want net expenses in the expense line. We want expenses and then the income / revenue on the top line. Do you kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I guess,
We
I don't
could
know
get a
how.
separate credit memo that,
What's that?
if we could get a separate credit memo that.
Yeah, something like that. That'd be helpful. That'd be a little more transparent, so we can see like the actual revenues. Because like then right now, like you actually generate more revenues than what you're listing.
Yeah.
So that's something that we want to help correct.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so I'm still trying to figure out with the equipment, and maybe it's just that I've never worked in student media, so I don't understand maybe some of the costs as an employee would. So you asked for an increase to $5,000 from $3,175 for audio and video equipment, even though you only spent $248. And then there's an increase, or then there's a decrease down, but it's still $3,400 for minor equipment, even though you spent $175. But then there's an increase on equipment rentals to $2,000, even though you only spent $15. How? I thought that point of increase or keeping the minor equipment like that safety net kind of space you were talking about, rather than really aggressively cutting it, you left $3,400 rather than being like, oh, they only spent $175, we should leave them with $1,000 or $1,500.
Right.
I thought that was in case they needed it on a timely manner. What would the equipment rentals be for if you're asking for an increase? Because I mean the increase is pretty significant. You had 194 approved in the last fiscal year, and now asking for 2,000, but you only spent 15.
Right.
Not you, but-
I know that the equipment rental, that line item in particular, comes in the form of renting the truck from athletics for coverage of the Battle of the Bands festival that we have, and that's an expense that we can't reduce, and it's just now being accounted for.
So
Which is
okay,
why-
so in 11-12, when the actual amount they spent wasn't accounting for what they're actually.
Exactly. It
Okay.
came from a
So
different
this
area.
year, for this fiscal year, we would see that amount, and it would be closer to 2,000 because they rented that truck.
Correct.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
But as far as the audio and video supplies, Julia, do you know exactly what those technically fall under? For KBVR TV, audio and video supplies?
So that's any, it could be everything from a cable to a wireless microphone, anything that could be minor equipment.
Yeah, I guess why would you need the increase though? Like, cause the big concern is, so in fiscal 12, you approved about $125,000 in expenses, but you spent under 95,000, and that's something we don't wanna see.
Right.
So it's kind of, like, for example, you were, so the big issue is these non-salary expenses, so basically operating expenses were approved at 38,000, but you spent 15,000, which is 40% of what you approved. So that's the issue on like why we'd be so hesitant to grant these kind of increases. Or like, I guess when we observe it, like, so hard for us to understand these increases when they don't, in the past, it's not been close to what you've been budgeting for.
Well, if you look at the budget for audio video supplies, it goes from 3,175 to 5,000, but if you go down to the minor equipment is 8,304 down to 3,400. So it's worth just moving those numbers.
But
Right.
no, but there's only $175 used from that 8,000 one, so even though it was cut, it wasn't cut.
That reflects a year that nothing broke. It's really what, you know.
But you also have a minor equipment that's at like a lot more than it should be, right? Yeah, you have a minor or you have an equipment reserve at 150,000 overfunded. And I still don't think, I mean, shouldn't audio and video supplies, I don't know why you'd move from audio video to, I guess it's the same thing, AV supplies and minor equipment are synonymous. Can you do it under either? Like if, yeah, like, I guess, is an audio video supply the same thing as minor equipment?
Well, I think these are index numbers that they're reflected in how they're recorded as index numbers rather than what the actual purchases are. I mean, minor equipment is anything under $5,000 and so would AV supplies be. But that could be batteries, AV audio video supplies. It could be cords, wireless adapters, that kind of thing, where equipment is a different.
Okay, I can't see, I don't like the, increase in AV supplies, definitely. I just don't see the justification.
I had
Go on, yeah.
a couple questions. If you guys are done with AV supplies,
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can go ahead.
I was wondering about Beaver Yearbook income because we heard that that you guys were doing some more to try and generate income, but my question was with the gaps in these numbers. In 2011, 2012, it was predicted to have 21,900 in income, and it only had 4,000, or about 5,000. And then it's being budgeted for $11,000, which is a really weird number set. And then at the same time, the advertising income was budgeted at $1,000 and only got $10, and was.
I'm sorry, where are you looking? I'm not, your numbers
Beaver
aren't matching up what
Yearbook,
I'm seeing.
This is, it doesn't have page numbers. Under
Okay.
Beaver Yearbook, the account code 06013
Okay.
is the one where it was budgeted to make 21,900 in income and only made 4,918 in income in 2011, 2012, and yet is being budgeted to have an income of $11,000. And I'm wondering why the overestimation.
So 11,200 is equivalent of selling 224 books, and the 4,000 reflects any of the books that I sold personally, not, like, it goes back to the publishing and printing cost of how the incomes of the books sold online are deducted from that.
Is she asking kind of a similar question?
Yeah.
I hear. So if they buy them through, let's say, her,
Yeah.
right, then it's recording the income, though, so it's they record on the revenue line. But let's say if they go on the publisher's website and buy a yearbook through there, then when they get billed for like the 400 books they purchase, they just net out the money that they get from the students buying the yearbook with the actual expenses.
So where is the expense listed down here for is that the printing costs?
Yeah, it's the printing and publishing.
Yeah, so that is in reality part expenses and part income through the publisher's website.
Is printing and publishing line 24606? Is that the one where it's reflected?
Yeah.
Correct.
So, I have a question. So would there be a better way to record those numbers to more accurately reflect what we're looking
Yeah,
for and
this
avoid
is-
this confusion in the
already went over
future?
that with her.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, because this, I've been staring at it for like 10
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that
There's
you
just-
wanted to respond more to
The issue that I have is throughout the
line item
budget,
stuff.
the amount, I mean, regularly throughout this budget, the amount spent in any given line item really doesn't reflect the amount budgeted. A couple of times it's over budgeted by a lot and it continues to be over budgeted. I see a lot of times when it's under budgeted, overspent, and continues to be under budgeted. And it's just like, I get that year to year, these are a lot of expenses that kind of fluctuate, but a lot of these are 2-3 times the amount that's being budgeted for.
Is there a question in there? Would you?
No, it's
Okay.
an issue.
It's just a concern.
It's a concern that has
Okay.
been kind of reflected through the general questions and then looking through the line items I've highlighted. Just for myself personally, and it seems to be reflected in the general outline of the budget that. Is there a better way to predict these numbers, or is there more historical evidence of what's been spent to show that this is being looked at?
Yeah, with the yearbook in particular, we've seen a decline in the amount of books that are being sold, but fortunately, they're on an upswing now with putting forward some of these new marketing techniques. So, I mean, those line items in particular definitely fluctuate on a year-to-year basis depending on what's being used and what is needed.
It's not just the yearbook, though. I mean, now I'm looking at, you look at KBVR, the first line and the second line, the numbers really don't match up. Here they had the issue with the minor equipment, computers, telecom usage, postage, all of these things, equipment maintenance. These numbers aren't reflecting what was used, and they're continuing to be budgeted at a higher amount. And this is all through this budget. If you look at dues and membership, it's 5 times the amount budgeted. If you look at entry fee competitors, it's 4 times the amount budgeted. There's just not really consistency in what was budgeted and what was spent in many of the line items.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could address those one at a time, but it's kind of hard to talk about all of them in the collective.
Well,
Oh, I totally missed, what was your kind of question?
my issue is that the amount budgeted
Oh.
really doesn't ever match up with the amount spent. There's so much variation, there's not a lot of matchup, and I'm saying that I understand the need for wiggle room,
I
but
think Brandon wants to speak to that as well.
Well, in a lot of these cases, it's very hard to predict, kind of, especially involving the KBVR, TV, and the radio side, with the volatility of kind of things breaking down. Right now, they're kind of dealing with equipment that at any given moment can go. And some years you have equipment that where nothing breaks. Other years you have stuff where lots of things kind of break down.
That's what the equipment reserves.
And there has been movement on kind of the postage and also the other stuff. I don't want to take up too much of the time, but there's just a lot of volatility in kind of a lot of these things. In some years, the incomes are higher than others. In other years, it's not. It's just the way the media works, the way the current environment of student media is operating. Once we do kind of the reviews, the review in the spring and the winter, and that is presented to, I'm assuming, you guys, I think we'll be able to kind of more streamline kind of this process, and there won't be as much fluctuation. But until then, it's just the volatility of the nature of these kind of departments.
so there's going to be a review of.
There was a review that was done in the summer. There was recommendations, not in the summer, 2 summers ago that was made. We'll be looking at that review, this EdAct committee. We'll be looking at student media moving out and what kind of position and things of that nature. We'll be looking at a lot of student organizations kind of moving and not moving out. So there'll be kind of a reorganization there. So there will be something kind of made up, and there will be decisions made by, I believe my goal is to have it by spring or by early summer.
What I would really like to see is just with these line items that are fluctuating so much, maybe an overall general historical trend. Is the general trend, if it's going up one year and down the next, is the trend line is the general trend line matching the amount you're budgeting for, or is it, you know what I mean?
Well, I think that's reflected in the budget, and I don't want to get into this because you guys don't have that much time left.
Sorry.
I know that, but
I was just
Am I
going to say
the only
that
one who's
looking
not?
at, I understand what you're saying with the nature of media it is volatile, right? There's going to be those times where you're not going to make the type of revenue that you're anticipating for that year. And so some of these items do make sense, right? And I think that they are part of the trend may be shown. For me, though, the equipment thing doesn't make sense because you're $150,000 over your equipment reserve. That's the reason that equipment reserve, or overfunded in the equipment reserve. That's the reason that exists in the first place. And so for me, it's hard to justify increases like you know, you spend $200 on equipment replacement, and you try and increase your budget from 3,000 to 5,000, and you say, well, this year we got lucky, but you also have you have the money in your equipment reserve for that purpose.
And that's some part of probably kind of the previous kind of EdActs where they weren't kind of looking at that as a ways to kind of spend that down. And this current EdAct committee is looking at ways to kind of reform that. And also, I understand your concerns about kind of some of the numbers kind of fluctuating obviously through and the rest of us can look at those. Well, not fluctuating, fine, raising, fine. I like semantics here. Rising, so there's obviously we can look at those numbers and either readjust them later on or talk about that. But there's reforms being done, adjustments being made. It's not like we're just arbitrarily just being like, yeah, let's give this away. I mean, we're not messing around with the student fee money in that way. Drew, you wanna-
Yeah, did you want to talk to the video, audio, video?
They don't have time.
Okay, do we not have time?
I do want to say that just with the student media stuff that has come up, though, I did really appreciate a lot of the stuff that Dawn also had to say. So I feel like, yeah, we've gotten to a point of talking about a lot of things that may seem to be fluctuating. But I was really pleased to hear of a lot of the cuts that I feel like were made. For me, I got the impression that you all, with the student media budget, did go over this in depth and think about areas that you could make cuts. And I just feel like that deserves to be said as well.
Thank you.
One thing I would add is that what I asked Nicole to do with her budget is to truly reflect where the money is being spent. So if it's being spent on minor equipment, or spent on video, and so that she moves the money to reflect more where she really needs the money and where it's being spent. So really, if you look, mostly it's moving the money around. Big change in this budget that you didn't see was the request to spend for travel, because the student media students have not historically had money to go to conferences for training, and that all of the students felt that they did need that. So,
Thank you for noticing.
Wait, what do you say about travel again?
well, historically, there was only some of the students at departments had money for travel. So overall, in student media, what we've asked is that all the departments, all student leaders have some professional development money set aside for them to travel. And if you look at the entire budget, you'll see that only some of the departments had money to go to conferences before, TV and FM. The barometer business manager, but the barometer editor did not. And so where we've added money for travel is so that all of the 7 student leaders would have that same equivalent type of professional development fund. And then in barometer's case, have the flexibility to cover out of state or, travel to cover things.
Thank you.
Actually spent them, didn't they? No, we're gonna move on from that right now. We have questions about their funding model.
Yeah, so I had a question about the funding model that you all suggested. Within EdAct's bylaws, how is the committee prepared to kind of take on that responsibility? I mean, is it something that you all have in your bylaws right now to be able to, do you have the parameters to do that? Will there be changes? What does that look like for you all?
So the funding will happen in much the same way that we addressed fund balance requests. So that functionality is not going to change. The way that folks will come forward to request those funds, like I said, is much in the same way. So it's very much so in the capacity of the committee itself to actually engage in that. It'll create more of a relationship basis between the committee and the organizations that are funded, where right now there's a lot of dissonance, where folks will just come in and talk to Kurt about trying to spend out of their budget, and really there's no sort of relationship there between educational activities and the organizations, yeah.
So will they need to then come, similar to if they were actually requesting, if they were requesting funds, like they would now from the fund balance, will they have to do that for any type of transaction out of what would have typically been their regular budget? Like, so basically, if they want to pay for anything, they're going to have to come and request funds for that payment before they can do that?
Right. We're trying to get more towards a timeline of the proper care for an organization. So rather than coming 2 weeks before, like, we need to buy this, really projecting out like what you're going to spend money on as an organization further off in advance. And then yes, they would come rather than just filling out a PR. It'd be more of a request. We're going to need this amount of stuff for this event that's 4 to 6 weeks out. Yes.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of EdAct being more involved in like student organizations and helping plan their events. But I'm wondering, is there a way, because I understand you'd want to go to SEAC for a lot of, planning, assistance, but then you'd be going to EdAct for money. Is there any way that you could see to sort of streamline that process?
Yeah, we have been looking at that, but in that we're two kind of different functioning groups. And the way that it works now, some of these organizations have sponsoring units outside of their current structure. So, I mean, like Forensics has an advisor within the speech comm department that really they go to them for a lot of that professional development. It would just be the function of the Student Events and Activity Center to provide sort of that advising role for the folks that aren't currently in a relationship like that. And that's the direction that the university is moving in order to make use of student fee dollars and university dollars. It really needs to be more of an active participatory role with the university. So it's on the student organizations where they want to be housed as far as finding an advisor, finding that sponsoring unit. Just the Student Events and Activity Center that has said anybody that is funded currently through educational activities has an opportunity to partner with us. But really, it's incumbent on the organization itself to find the home that's the best fit for them. So we're not trying to micromanage what the student organizations are doing. We just want to make sure that they're getting the proper care for those student fee dollars that are being spent.
How would you anticipate, let's say, a student organization comes to you, a month in advance, like you're asking, or even if it's further out than that, and they are able to identify, this is what we anticipate we're going to spend, for our whatever fill in the blank event, right? Here's A through G, whatever, that we're going to have to spend here. We have to pay this person. Here's a personal service contract we have to fill. We'll pay them this much, and then we're going to spend this on whatever. What happens if they go over that, right? So if you have to come and make a request to spend what was once your own money, kind of, right, or that money that kind of was allocated to that organization, and they can no longer use that money when they need it. And what if they go over and that needs to be spent in a timely manner? How is the board anticipating basically facilitating those types of situations where you have to deal with the fact that maybe they they didn't quite budget it, they weren't accurate, and they were instead of spending $10,000 they have to spend $12,000, and that needs to be paid within the next week or two? Or how are you going to anticipate things like that?
A lot of the detailed procedures and processes for this we haven't outlined quite yet, since it's far out in advance. It's something that we're going to be more solidifying throughout winter term, the rest of winter term, and really spring term, find out what those procedures are going to be when it comes to things like that. And that's a great thing to bring up in our conversation about how those immediate expenditures are going to be needed to be made. And generally, when it comes to our fund balance requests, we usually project a little bit over in the off chance that there is that additional need. But that's definitely something that we could address in those conversations, and thank you for bringing that up. Yeah,
just to ask a hard question.
Oh, please.
If the committee were to say something about not supporting this type of funding model, how would your committee respond to that if basically we said we would prefer the old model instead?
Well, I guess we would revert back to the individualized budgets and increasing our budget $26,000, and then going back to the existing model. I mean, it would kind of undo everything that we've done the last few months, but I mean, that's on your prerogative.
On that, I don't think you would need to increase your budget. You could just keep everything the same and just still proportionally approve.
It would be difficult to do that in that they've had those previously allocated dollar amounts. I mean,
Yeah.
do you want to speak on that a little
It
bit?
was vetted with the groups when they came in and all.
Yeah, and they all supported this model.
I think it's because it's very similar to what rec sports does with sport clubs. We don't fund each really sport club individually. It's I mean, it's more of a just sport club line item. Although the big concern would be the checks that would come in at the end. Like, it's something that I think you would still need to present following years. I don't know, you really won't be able to do much next year on how this worked out. You could do a little bit, but I think we would still need to see how that money was spent.
Oh, absolutely.
Per organization. So we can, I think that's my biggest concern anyways, would be like that check and balance to make sure we actually see how well it's working and there aren't like huge expenditures or something like that.
Yeah, I want to get to Jacob too, but that's definitely something that we'd keep track of, and that's very much so Kurt's department as far as tracking what those expenses would be per organization, so that we know what each organization is spending and how much proportionate they are spending, and then that's part of that evaluation process to find out whether or not they are using more than they had before, or whether or not that need is adequately addressing.
Would they be making a budget anymore?
No, that's the thing. They would make per event or per scenario budgets rather than projecting out that year and a half.
Yeah, that was sort of my question, is have student organizations submitted budgets to you for this year, since the whole sort of game plan was to switch over to this collective funding pot?
No, it was like I said, that questionnaire of, is your current funding level adequate? Do you have additional needs? Do you have additional funding sources?
Okay, so should the committee request to go back to the old model, we wouldn't have accurate budgets for current organizations and what their projections would be as of this year.
Which is why I would say we'd have to revert back to the dedicated dollar amount of what we have currently, which would be 20% larger than this collective fund that we've already
What
established.
about the idea of operating almost on a different fiscal year for each budget? Like, so, because I think creating a budget for an organization is good, and I think it's something that would be beneficial, especially so you kind of help they don't go too crazy.
Right.
Like at the beginning of the school year, they just kind of make a budget of what they kind of map out what they expect to kind of spend throughout the year. It wouldn't really line up with this budget request, but you could still get a trend that way and then apply it in the following year.
Right. And that would be part of that evaluation and that tracking, which is exactly what we would be looking at doing.
We currently have organizations' budgets for their events when they have them, and then ideally we ask them to do a post-event audit where they go and track what they budgeted and what they spent, so they keep record of that. But we do have them budget individually as it is. It's just sometimes they're budgeted so far in advance, by the time they get ready, there's dedicated money sitting there, it might not reflect what they actually found that they need at the point that they need it.
Which is why we see a whole lot of them capitalizing on their entire dollar amounts.
Yeah, I know, just speaking as the president of a student organization, I definitely like the new model a lot better because it allows you to plan out for certain events, and you're not limited to the budgeting that officers of the past might have. You're not limited to their dreams. You can make your own, and it's more individualized, I think.
Right, and that's exactly what we were aiming for.
Also, new programs are possible.
Exactly.
Being a part of pre-law, having mock trials, try to figure out their budgeting has been kind of hard.
Right. It allows for that flexibility to really do what this current leaderships need.
Anyone have any more questions about the funding model?
Thanks for the
Or
hard
something
question.
that we could maybe talk about in recess? I want to ask something about working capital. So if you can explain to me this, so this $50,000 that I guess you're planning to take out this year, was that approved last year?
Okay, I don't know that it was approved last year. It's something that the committee does as part of that contingency request. It's not always $50,000. That was just what the committee this year settled on as a tangible amount to fund those additional needs.
Additional needs meaning, like, let's say there's a new student group that wants to be funded.
Right, a new student group that wants to put on a brand new event that just started. we want to be that incubator organization, or the incubator funding group that helps to support that new and innovative idea.
Okay,
$50,000
what,
a year.
well,
It's
I guess,
$50,000. It's like,
you haven't done this in the past?
no, we have. This is
Okay.
this is a trend that we've done for quite some
So
time.
you've been
not for
transferring
not for an
50,
individual
I
budget.
didn't say
I know.
just like as a total for new groups coming in there.
so EdAct has been transferring $50,000 out of their fund balance every year?
Not
Or-
necessarily $50,000.
or
It's the committee that sets it. Yeah.
How much have they done in the past?
Kurt, can you give examples?
It's really wide ranging. I don't have printouts for past years. I mean, last year, just in the ones that didn't have a current budget. So we do it a couple different ways. They have a budget and they need additional dollars to allow them to spend, or say you can overspend X number of dollars out of your budget. If you look at the very end of the printout, there's a thing called Annual Fund Balance Awards, and $84.91.18 was spent last year.
Wait, where?
So
The very
in
end
your
of the
line
budget.
item budget?
Number.
The very end of it, yes.
Yeah, but in years past, the typical starting point's been about 30,000 that they've committed to be able to provide for organizations. I think they're roughly at about 25 at present, and we have a number of them that are pending.
Wait, so current year what?
Current year, I think there has been awarded, that one we haven't cited, 22,219 from fall term. We have a number that's pending.
You let-
22,000.
22,000
Yeah.
fall term.
22. Yeah.
This is something that a lot
You
of
spe-
organizations really look to as that support, because many of these student organizations are not funded. And it's really those costs that are not foreseeable.
Gets back to that funding model we just talked about. Well, some organizations come in and the leaders from the previous year said we want to spend money X, Y, Z. When they get to the current fiscal year and they find, whoops, that's not going to come up. That's not going to be enough.
So with the new funding model, I don't really see a need for this anymore because the funding model is supposed to cover that.
Right, that would include the organizations that are currently funded, but any of those that are outside of the list
Yeah.
would still have needs.
Could
And that's
you,
where those are addressed.
But it's a constant thing that occurs every year. But it's
Yeah, they've been doing fund balance awards.
Can you? I think
I don't know how much is actually spent that fund balance work per year.
it'd be more. It'd make more sense if you include that like in your actual operating budget. Like, so you don't really budget it within your budget. Like, it's not included.
It's just a way that we spend down our working capital.
Okay.
And this is because, like, historically, you've seen a trend of having an excess working capital due to organizations not spending the full amount that they're allocated for. So can you anticipate within this fiscal year, if this board has decided to transfer in $50,000, do you think that will actually be, that $50,000 will actually be spent by new organizations putting on events? Or do you think that?
Yeah, that's the hope. For some of the organizations that we currently fund, it's for those unexpected expenses too. Like a year and a half ago, Omega Delta Phi didn't know that they were going to go to their national conference, but it was something that they wanted to do. So they made a request of it, and that was one of
You're
the
able to
ones that
use
we
that for
approved
that.
during fall term.
Yeah.
Hopefully, with the shifting to this different funding model, we can focus more of those dollars on the organizations that are in there, and then that additional contingency can be more focused on those new student organizations, or those organizations that don't have funding elsewhere. And that's part of the marketing thing that we're working on.
And those organizations are ones that just might form this year, or organizations don't have funding at all and they want to do something that requires money.
A lot of organizations. don't
Right,
have funding.
it's really pretty wide open to folks to apply for it, as long as they fit under our funding guidelines.
The difference in years past, they've been required to ask one ask a year, so they had to kind of outline what they needed, and that didn't always address it. And I think this year, they changed it to come ask as you need. We're just kind of evaluating as we're going, but there is always quite a few requests every year.
And again, it's not a request that we have to fund in full or nothing. We can fund a part of that request, and there's also something that we call matching funds. Or say an organization needs $1,000, we'll say, yeah, we'll give you 500, and if you raise 250, we'll match that for a grand total of $750 from EdAct and 250 raised on their own accord, so that they still reach their total as sort of an inspiration to raise funds for whatever program or conference that they might be wanting to travel to.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions? I think we're gonna take a quick recess.
It's like 5 minutes.
They're never 5 minutes long.
What?
They're never 5 minutes long.
Yeah, we'll make it.
7.5. I'm counting.
All right, we're gonna take a quick recess. 10 minutes. We'll reconvene at 8:45.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna reconvene.
Cool.
So one thing we discussed. Do you want to talk to totally blanked on what I was gonna say about the budget? What was it? What was the point of the
Asking
budget?
for the funding model to allow them to have
The survey.
assessments. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So for the funding model, if we, so what we're gonna, what our idea is to a budget note, so for next year's budget submission, we want surveys from the different organizations you're funding, all of them, on asking them about the funding model. And we figure that by that time, they'll go through a full term, and they can kind of have a good idea of what it's like. But so you're gonna start that next fiscal year?
Right.
It's still going
Still
the same way?
the way it is right now. Right.
Okay.
Folks
I mean,
have
so I guess
dedicated
they'll have
budgets.
summer, I don't think. Do you guys does your organizations have any expenditures in the summer?
Some travel to conferences.
Okay,
That
so-
accounts for most of it. And then theater has some Bard and Quad.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a small amount.
Yeah, so we want, when you turn your budget next year, we want the surveys for all the organizations about the funding model, asking like how it went, just, I don't know, you can probably brainstorm questions here over the next 2-4 months.
Basically, just an assessment of the new funding model. Kind of just use this year as like, okay, we're trying it out. Let's make sure that this is actually what's working well for all the organizations, and then making that process really open and transparent, so that if organizations do say that, hey, this didn't work out for us very well, we weren't able to, actually use the amount of funding that we typically use, or this slowed our planning process down quite a bit, or something like that. So those things can be presented.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the idea. And especially for next year, we're going to have kind of that preliminary information, because they'll only have a summer and realistically a fall term with that experience. I think the more determinative findings will come the following year, once folks have had a whole year as part of that process. But again, all of those findings and any sort of assessment we'll absolutely make transparent and bring back to the committee next year.
Cool. Also, for the advertising institutional, I guess that's promo and publicity.
Sorry.
And KBVR. Is this KBVR?
TV or FM?
TV. Question on why it's going up when it was under budget.
TV, I'm sorry, what's the line item?
It's 24612.
24612.
And the same question for 23523.
Hold on. I don't have the best information or response for that particular line item. Juliet, can you talk about the advertising person recruit publicity? Is that for gaining folks for their for positions for KBVR, TV, and FM?
Really more marketing that we had a television station, getting the word out about our programs.
Yeah, that was part of the big marketing plan to get the word out, because a lot of folks don't know that we have even a TV station or a radio station, and it's just trying to get that publicity out there so that folks will get more involved in the organization, or at least just watching the programming. And there's been a reduced number of that in the past years. And really, I think that's the push of media, is to get themselves out there and be more well-known across the campus and community.
So that really wasn't a focus in 2011, last year?
Well, I'm sure it was a focus,
Well,
but not as large of a.
We're just discovering that part of the problem is that people don't know that we have a television station, a radio station, and student managers intent with this budget is that the next station manager will have more funds to run advertisements and, but, you know, right now that group doesn't have their own tent, for example.
Okay. What about data processing, electrical equipment? It was not, you didn't spend any last year.
Oh, is that the licensing? This is 23523, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do either of you have more information on that one?
I'd like to explain how much was spent last year.
Can you explain more of what that line item is?
Data processing, electrical equipment would be, you know, the wiring, for example, cable, that kind of thing, data processing. I assume that would be
It's actually a maintenance line item.
maintenance fees.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't like that working capital drawdown.
Yeah, I would change that from, like, I do, even just incorporate $50,000 back into the actual budget.
Did we lose Victoria?
House per student per term, or what do you want to do?
She sometimes goes down just the phone call one, so she gets better signal.
That makes sense.
Let's approve it without any drawdown and then work it
She's
out
there.
and tell them to figure it out. We'll talk to them.
Why don't we work it down with like a $50,000 drawdown so that we're not reducing, increasing, because otherwise.
I mean, we're gonna increase their fee no matter what, we'll reduce it. I think we'll
feel like I should do
focus
the
that
answers.
we'll change it, but I don't know what to do yet with it.
So this is like what, right now, 11 something, right?
They're requesting
like one of
808.
I know, and what are we doing now, 11
And
something?
it looks like one of
What's
Will's.
that?
11
Is
something.
Becky the
Right
one who
now?
works with the forensics?
He and Corey Thornburg.
36.
Makes sense.
I mean, it'd still be dropping it to
Rhetorical.
950.
Oh, that's without the,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Also, what we're gonna do is we're gonna eliminate the 100,000 transfer from working capital because we need to make that more long-term focused instead of just a short. Because you literally drop the fee $1.50 next year and then have to raise it by $1.50 the year after.
So
According to that plan.
you're gonna raise it $1.50 from what we proposed?
Yeah, but we're gonna work with y'all to figure out something that's more long-term.
For working capital.
That's your prerogative.
I mean, we're just moving at 958.
Yeah.
Just note that we tried to reduce it. Students,
What exactly does that mean, more long-term?
Well, I mean, we just don't like the idea of having a fee drop for 1 year like that. Compared to, like, you'll have to, it
again,
seems like you'll have to move it up by,
that's gonna be reevaluated, and if you look at the, using 20% a year, by 2015, even if we only increased the fee by 75 cents next year, that 75-cent reduction will still be reflected as part of that drawdown.
yeah, but I mean, I can't settle on a number right now, and so I'm just gonna get rid of it because I'm not gonna try to do that calculations and what we think is appropriate.
So you're gonna
Right now.
reevaluate it by tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fair.
Exactly, it's
First, for
planned.
now, we're tentatively approved for 958.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if the committee has any other thoughts on that, but that'd be my idea.
It'll just make the drawdown like more sustainable and more long-term. I mean, there is the possibility that within this new funding model that these student organizations are going to be using the allocated amounts of funds, and so you won't have to see the same types of kind of increases or additions to that, and so it might not be sustainable to use this model. Whereas if we we tentatively approve at your higher number right now and change that, then tomorrow we can get something that the board feels is a more sustainable number to use to draw down from. So it'll still be the reduction in the overall student fee, and you'll still receive this budget. It'll just be somewhere in between that 958 and 808.
It's all up to y'all. We just try to present the cheapest per student we possibly could.
It isn't the cheapest. It's, I mean, using the working capital makes it an illusion of being the cheapest, but next year it's gonna expand the same, so.
Just trying to reduce the impact on students this year, or next year rather.
And
Any more discussion?
The work count's good, or the decrease is good.
All right, if anyone wants to, oh wait, what's their summer ask?
850.
No, that's what they're getting this year.
707.
Oh, 717.
717.
717. Yeah, okay. I move to tentatively approve the educational activities budget at $9.58 for student fall, winter, spring term, and for $7.17 per student for summer term, summer 15.
Is there a second?
Doesn't sound like
Is there a second?
1136.
Approve EdAct's budget, tentatively approve at 958 fall, winter, spring next year, and 717 summer 2015. Is there a second?
Sounds like a new motion.
Thank you. I hear a second from Madison. Any discussion on the motion made? Here and now, moving a roll call vote to tentatively approve EdAct's budget at 958 fall, winter, spring, and 717 in the summer 2015. Amelia?
4.
Tyler?
4.
Nick?
4.
Madison? 4. Tori?
4.
Tara?
Abstain,
Why?
because I'm tired and this makes no sense and I need to look over it again. I'm being really honest and I should not be voting right now.
All right, on a 5-0 vote with 1 abstention, EdAct's budget at 958 is tentatively approved fall, winter, spring, and 717 in the summer. Thank you. Yeah, just a reminder, send me that, Prezi, and then we'll see you tomorrow for the final. All right, we'll be back at 9:05 for music. Oh, there. Cool.
Ruined my day.
Actually, you know what I just realized? If we were
Oh.
anticipating
They're trying to make me a counselor, I guess.
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
You should be so nice that next year they spell out Brad.
Yeah.
Brad A. I'm just Inception planting the idea.
It's not gonna be, you're gonna be. Yeah.
I'm not graduating. Actually,
No, I know you're not
Actually, I want to be ex officio. I want to be in the house.
If you do ex officio in the House, I might try to do ex officio in the Senate.
All right,
I'm
we should
thinking about
really
that.
start.
Where'd it go?
Not that we really have a lot of time to review
Jen's
the budget.
probably like, no.
I'm gonna be unemployed.
What?
Wait, did you say
It's because we're in your office. I'm in your office all the time.
Me?
Taking them, eating your candy. That's what it's there. After the mood. That's the day before bedtime. Oh my gosh, I know, but then I left and I was like, they probably had so much other stuff they have to do, and I'm here like asking questions. We got it through. Yeah. No, you guys are good. That was never a question. I think I've seen it on a Skype session.
But oh yeah, my Skype session. Yeah, I like San Diego now.
She's the one that you all were talking about who's like doing really cool things and starting new programs and stuff. That's awesome. And she still Skypes in on your meetings?
Guys, I didn't
Yeah,
make
I mean, she's still my employee.
What?
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
A quick note, if you look in the line item budget, it is